So can you talk to me or talk to the audience about what a deal is in the speaking business?
So I would say, the deal, everyone is different. And as I talk to clients, it's something where everyone has their own motivations. Some it's an ego play, some it's financial. Some are trying to grow a business and want to have more exposure. Some are trying to build their own personal brand. So the typical speaker's deal is really a single engagement. It's finding them an opportunity to speak in front of a crowd. And when money is changing hands, be it for travel, expenses, or compensation, that's when the deal comes together.
So what did you get the most of? A single engagement or people who wanted to do a circuit?
It's really a little bit of everything. I mean, especially at CAA, I was working with actors and writers, directors, politicians, entrepreneurs, athletes, coaches, chefs, CEOs. It completely runs the gamut. So I think everyone has their own motivations there too. We focus on money-making opportunities. As an agent, that's our goal, right? We're hired to provide money-making opportunities for our clients, whatever those may be. Tours are a thing that are a bit of a misnomer. The reality is we don't get the benefit of routing the way a music agent does with concerts. If you're booking private dates, you don't get to tell a company this is when your annual meeting is because this is when they're available. So in the college world, you get a little bit more of that because you can route dates around certain cities. But really, it's a series of one-off opportunities that you do your best to kind of tie things together.
Did you attend any of the speaking engagements or? Okay, so this is where and obviously I'm not asking names or anything like that, but tell me some of the, maybe 2 or 3 things that you saw with people who were very poor speakers or what their approach was and what made them not so great. And it was almost Well,
I think there's a lot you can do to improve being a speaker, right? I think being authentic is number one. Of course. If you're not yourself on stage, everyone knows it, right? There's also something where you have to give people what they're expecting, right? If you go to see your favorite band and you don't hear the greatest hits, you get upset.
Absolutely.
Conversely, if your favorite speaker comes out talking about the French economy and they're supposed to be talking about innovation, the audience is going to be a little confused. It just doesn't work that way.
Know your audience.
So you really have to know your audience. I also think it's something where it's important where you have to know yourself and be aware. I think self-awareness is key when you get on stage because you can't expect a group of an audience to be interested in something that's just not interesting. You have to know where that lies. And I think it's all about, at the end of the day, storytelling. And so you have to be able to not only know what is a good story, but how do you tell that story in a way that's going to be exciting.
So if you need to know your audience and you need to give them what they want, doesn't that create a problem if you want to be authentic and right now you want to talk about A when the audience wants B?
Well, I think it's about storytelling. I think that's what it comes down to. You can find a unique way of telling that story in a way that's meaningful. Depending on obviously your background, that and what you've done and what you're speaking about, it will obviously change. But if you can effectively share a story, it can be impactful. A simple thing. I find that linear storytelling doesn't necessarily get the message across. If you start with, this is what I did, then this is what I did, then this is what I did, and you just go across that line, it's not as exciting as if you start with, you landed somewhere, right? Something happened, right? Well, how did you get to that position, right? And you kind of tell the story and you give the audience a little bit more. And so that's just a very simple way of kind of changing the paradigm of what the conversation is. And you can control what the messaging is based on the stories you tell.
Got it. I think when I saw Peter McKinnon at VidSummit, he talked about, I have gained 1 million subscribers in 9 months, blah, 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 here I am. And he just kind of laid it on and then he rewound, right? It was just kind of like Breaking Bad, where they always show something ridiculous at the beginning and then you finally get caught up to it. And then he's talking about how he worked at State Farm and then how he was, I think, Nike, and he's like, I can't do this, something ridiculous. But it was really, really good. It kind of set the tone if you put the big banger up front and then follow it up. It was very interesting. So that's
and it's also, even if it's not something super exciting that you know about, it can be just an interesting situation that you were put in. And it's like, well, how did I get here? And so it all is about what message you're trying to relay, what you're trying to get across, and again, knowing the audience, knowing what they're looking for, so that you're at least trying to impact them. But at the end of the day, I always say, if you're sitting in an audience, the person next to you is probably going to get a different message than what you're getting, because you're in a different life place. You're, looking for different things, you're trying to understand different things, and so, it's important that as a speaker you realize that, because you need to be able to relay information effectively.
Would you consider not public speaking, but speaking to large audiences hard?
Absolutely. No doubt about it. It's a skill that has to be honed like any other.
Some of the people that you had deals with, did they ever do a dry run, a practice, or did a lot of them wing it? Like, what did you kind of see?
Great question. I think, there's a lot of speakers who have a canned speech. This is the speech I deliver, whether you're a group of college students or a group of insurance agents. Usually not the way to go. Yeah. It's really best if you just think about what's the message you're trying to get across, what are the stories that you have that are interesting, and how can you tie them all together? And I think that's usually what's more impactful. But it always depends, again, on what the message is, right? If you're known for climbing Mount Everest, you should tell the story about how did you climb Mount Everest, but what was exciting along the way, and finding those interesting pieces across the board. But it's something where, there's not one size fits all, so it really is dependent on kind of who the person is, what their message is, and what the event is. But I would hope people at least practice. But it gets to the point where it's internalized, right? Like, Gary does not have a written speech. He is able to, but he's also done hundreds of speeches to hone his message. So for him, I'm sure he still gets butterflies before he goes on stage, but he's not flop sweating like the rest of us. So it's always different, but I think, you have to know what you're trying to get across. Likewise, I would hope that, a CEO is going to give the annual meeting address. It's going to be rehearsed and it's going to be written, because you want to make sure you're discussing certain things. Totally. So it's all about the framework of what you're trying to get across. I think it's also, it's important to know your own medium. If you're not a good public speaker, you can practice, but that doesn't mean you're going to be great. And sometimes it's, there's two sides to it I always look at. There's the actual speech side and there's the performance side. You have to understand how to, what do you do with your hands? How do you change the intonation of your voice? Do you walk on stage? Are you standing at a podium? Right? All of these different things play into it, but then the message and what you're saying is also very important.
Very true. Before we get into Vayner Speakers, can you tell me the best storyteller? And if it's Gary, then let's go with option B. The best storyteller is someone that just fascinated you that you were able to work with.
I'll cheat a little bit. So there's an author by the name of Jeff Zaslow. He passed away a few years ago. He wrote The Last Lecture with Randy Pausch. He was one of the best I've ever worked with. Wow. He had an amazing way of understanding the human condition, but also storytelling. I mean, he was a journalist and an author, and he connected with people in a really unique way, but he knew how to mold his story or whatever message he was saying for an audience. He was also, it didn't hurt, one of the nicest guys in the world. And so, that comes out, but I think the way that separated him was his storytelling ability and his way of, getting the audience to emote. If you can get an audience to laugh and cry in the same speech, you're one of the better ones. And he just had that kind of ability to inspire crowds, get them thinking about themselves, leave them wanting more, and leave them thinking about it. Because if you just walk out and the greatest thing they got was a selfie, there's really not much to it. But if you're able to leave people and the next day they're still thinking about it, you left an impact. So, I mean, even the best speakers, I don't recommend anyone give a speech longer than 60 minutes. There's psychological evidence that after it's 52 minutes, you start to tune out. One voice on stage for over 52 minutes. Well, then don't speak for that long. And I think that's, not to get into the educational system, but I think that's often a problem, is you're just not in a place where you're going to physically be able to keep listening no matter how interesting the speaker or the subject.
Yes, there's a saturation level. I completely agree. And even stand-ups, comedy, I'm just okay, there's definitely points where I've been watching one that's funny, but very few where I'm I hope this goes on and continues to go on. I'm just kind of all right, dude, let's wrap it up. Very interesting. So, Vayner Speakers, please tell me how you were, anointed, so to speak, as a CEO. I mean, clearly you have all the experience to do so, but what was that like? And then please tell me about where it's at.
It was clearly Gary's biggest mistake. So, as I worked with Gary, we got closer and closer over the years. And so I left CAA in late August. October 1, we launched Vayner Speakers. So the idea was to kind of launch a speakers bureau. We'll be a traditional bureau in the sense that we're representing exclusive clients. But the idea is to do it a little bit differently. It's an industry that hasn't had a lot of innovation over the years. There have been some, by all means, and certain people who do it better than others, but I think it's just there are, groups that make it more difficult to book a speaker than it needs to be. And what I found is over time, it's not just Fortune 500 companies that are booking speakers. And so if you're a small business owner and you want to bring someone in to speak to your 100 employees, you should be treated with the same respect, and you should be able to book whoever you want to book if you're able to. Yep. So we're trying to approach it with an empathy towards the customer. One of my customers called this free consulting, but I want to do what I can to make your event better. It makes my client happier and it makes your event better, and then you'll probably want to work with me again. Yep. And so, Gary and I have a very similar viewpoint on customer service, and we are approaching this with, I think, a similar lens of just really doing the right thing for the right people and trying to grow a business opportunity for clients who are great speakers and have a message to share. So I try to learn from Gary first off, right? Not just as an amazing entrepreneur, but he's one of the most prolific speakers in the world, right? If I'm not tapping into that to try and learn how can I make things better for you as your agent, I'm not doing my job. Conversely, I'm also talking with his assistants, right? If they're working for one of the best speakers in the world and I'm not trying to learn from them about what I can do to make their lives better, then I'm not learning. And so I'm trying to basically tap into every resource I have to understand what we can do differently and better. And, I think it's all about listening. I talk to my customers. I have relationships with a lot of my customers in a way where they're personal relationships. I see them outside of work hours and we talk about things other than deals. And so when you do that, I think you learn what's important to them and how you can help them. And I think that that's really where we've kind of taken a lot of this approach, is figuring out, all right, well, we want to keep working with you, so what do we have to do to accomplish that? Because I think what I've realized, it's not the relationships necessarily with talent, right? There's a lot of competition for these speaking opportunities. But if you have the relationship with the customers and understand what they want, you can be a better resource for them. Yes. And if you have these if you're a resource for all these great groups, you're a better agent to your clients. Yep. And so that's really where this is all stemmed from.
There's an analogy, not an analogy, a kind of anecdote someone uses. And it's if you go to a barber shop, and you get a really good haircut, and you're getting like all these compliments, like you are obligated to give that barber business, right? So like if you have a good experience, like it's all about the customer experience. It seems like what you're saying, like speaking, of course that's a part of it, but if I like working with Zach, if I like working with Vayner Speakers, then the chance of that customer life cycle is probably going to be extended significantly. So what's on tap for Vayner Speakers this year?
The idea is we're going to be focused in the kind of entrepreneurial business space. Speakers who can speak to corporate America, can speak to small business owners, and we don't have multiple speakers who are all the same person. We're trying to find different people who have different areas of expertise, different backgrounds. We're working with C-level executives, we're working with authors, we're working with entrepreneurs, we're working with brand builders, and the idea is that in the business world today, there's a lot of different messages that are out there, and we want to find people who can effectively communicate a message to a varying audience. And especially today when everyone seemingly wants to be an entrepreneur, there's a lot of skills they need, and so no one person can do that. But we're working with a lot of different people who can create opportunities to impact audiences on stage. I think the best speakers can adapt to the audience, as we said. So I think it's not any one message or any one topic, if you will. I think it's really just being able to change your story, or not change your story, but change the speech and alter the remarks for each audience. Right now politics is a hot topic, obviously. It's been so for a few years. Political speakers are still very active, and they will be, but no one wants to hear a athlete getting on stage and just talking about politics, right? So it's something where you just have to know kind of your audience going back to that. But I think it's something where the clients that we're working with, it's about being authentic to who they are. And so, part of my job is also to intimately understand who they are. It's not secrets that sell people, but it's usually things that you just don't know. Yeah. And so the more you learn about a person, the more you can effectively, quote unquote, sell them to an audience. If
there's people, and again, like speaking is very, very difficult, but if people have a good message and they want to public speak, what are some things that you would tell people who aspire to do so, and the best way to just kind of start?
Well, I think the biggest misconception is like, I'm a great speaker, I just need an agent, right? Oftentimes that's not the case. If you're a great speaker, then get on stage and speak, right? I think my favorite example is Gary. When I started working with Gary, he was a very difficult person to get out there. He wasn't the name he is today. Social media wasn't what it was today, or wasn't what it is today. So Gary's someone who had to grow his own brand, and he's gotten much better as a speaker. And so it's something where, looking back, not that everyone should model their career after Gary, but everyone who thinks I deserve to be out there, just ask Gary how many speeches he did in 2008, 2009, 2010. It's something where you have to be out there. You have to get as much work done as you can, right? You shouldn't expect that people are going to pay you to speak if you don't have anything to say. If you don't have any history of speaking. I get asked a lot by prospective clients, will I sign them? They've never been on stage. How do I know if they can actually speak? I think even great speakers can always get better. I think it's what the market demands and what the market can create. But you just have to get out there. You have to get reps. You have to do free speeches. Speak at your church. Try to do a TEDx event. Go guest lecture at your college. Do networking events and offer to speak. Right? There are groups that don't have budgets for speakers, and they're great opportunities to try it out in front of a crowd. It's kind of like open mic night. You don't start by doing Carnegie Hall, right? If you think you're going to come out of the gates doing that, it's not going to work. And you also don't start doing small comedy clubs, just out of the gate. You have to start by honing material and figuring out what works and what doesn't, and failing, and not being afraid to get back up and try it again. But that's when you are speaking and afterwards you come off stage and someone says, you were great, I'd love to have you at my event, which is happening next week, that's when okay, there's something here. I have an opportunity to really grow my business. But every event is an opportunity to do another one, and that's the instant feedback you'll get if you really should be out there doing a lot of speaking. And that's not to say you shouldn't keep trying, but you have to keep working at it.
That's a very good take.